Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I have to tell you right up front that I'm probably going to cry, and that part of it's probably your fault, so let's give each other a little break here. On February 22nd, 2007, I left my office at Fidelity Investments in Covington, where I was a senior relationship manager on the 401k platform with about $1.5 billion under management. I drove to the airport, I took a flight to Philadelphia, and when I got to Philly, I rented a car, drove downtown, and checked in at the Marriott like I'd done at least once a week for the past year. After dinner downstairs with a friend, I went back to the concierge floor where I was staying, stopped by the lounge to grab a Diet Coke and to see if there were any chocolate chip cookies left. And if you stayed at the Marriott, you know what I'm talking about. And then I headed back to my room. About 8 o'clock, people started arriving to work on a project that I was leading with a rapidly approaching deadline. We spread materials all over the conference table. We brainstormed, we argued, we compromised. We ordered snacks, drinks from downstairs, and worked till well past 2 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed exhausted, but very happy with the work that we'd gotten done. When I got up early the next morning, I went to the conference table to grab a copy of the report so that I could look it over at breakfast. And there was nothing there. There were no reports, there was no paper, no glasses, no empty plates, nothing. It took a few minutes, but I realized that there was no meeting. There hadn't been anyone else in my room all night. Yet I clearly remembered interacting with them for hours. As I put on my suit and tie, I began to be a little more worried about what had happened, and more importantly, what it meant for my mental state. What I know now is that this is possibly my first psychotic episode. The first time that my brain, which I'd always considered one of my greatest assets, had unknowingly to me flipped a switch, effectively shutting off my conscious decision-making ability, and began to feed what I can only call corrupted data to the rest of my body, of which it remained in control. I had no idea then, I couldn't even imagine, what my life was going to be like over the next 11 years. I grew up like many of you, had a great childhood in Plano, Texas, an upper middle class suburb of Dallas. My mom managed the city library, and my dad was an engineer who spent his entire career with the same firm. My younger sister Laura and I grew up playing tennis, and we played through high school. I had wonderful friends. I was a very smart kid. And when I graduated, I headed west to Abilene to attend Abilene Christian University, where I got a degree in finance after 5 of the best years of my life. I graduated in 1990, and through a friend, took a job in the insurance industry in Dallas. I moved up quickly, and a few years later, I was recruited by Aetna for a sales position in their Dallas office. I spent 30 days training in Hartford, Connecticut in the winter with 30 other people from across the country, and as fate would have it, one of them was a young lady from Cincinnati. So you probably already know where this is headed, right? In 1997, I started looking for a job in Cincinnati. And in September, I took a position here as a relationship manager with an insurance broker and moved here. In 1999, I got married, built a house, and in 2001, had a son who's now a junior at the top high school in the state. In 2005, I had an opportunity to take my relationship management skills to Fidelity. The job was incredible, and it was a great fit for me. Soon after joining Fidelity, I was promoted to a senior position with complete responsibility for the 3rd largest book of business in the country. I was good at what I did, loved my career, and I felt very blessed to have fallen into an industry right out of college that afforded me the opportunity to use my client-facing skills, and it gave me a great living. I've been earning six figures since I was 30 years old, and there was every reason to believe that that would continue. But sometimes life has a way of stepping in. Let's go back to Philly and get me out of the Marriott. I left Philadelphia, flew back to Cincinnati. I didn't know what to do. I went to the hospital, I was admitted, and I spent a week there before I was ready to go home. I left with a diagnosis, bipolar disorder 1 with psychosis, and a regimen of medicines. I've never left the doctor's office and said, nope, that's not right. That's not what's wrong with me. But I did that day. It took me more than 3 years to even begin to accept, let alone understand, that I had a mental illness. During those 3 years, I was constantly up and down, the hallmark of bipolar disorder. I struggled with my mood. I stayed awake for days at a time, often not laying down for 96, 120 hours. But my mind was racing so fast that even if I were tired, which I rarely was, I knew that I'd never be able to close my eyes. My productivity during my manic episodes was hit and miss. During one 4-day stretch, I wrote and recorded an album in the studio basement of a friend who was a sound engineer. I was a little perturbed. He didn't share my drive for the project. So we came to a decision that I would write all night and then we would record during the day when he was awake. I thought that was pretty accommodating of me until a few years later when I realized that we'd both made some concessions for each other that week. When I was depressed, my mental illness told me that the best thing that I could do would be to isolate myself. It told me that my family and friends, they didn't really care about me, that they'd be better off without me, and in fact, society would be better off without me. I listened, and I believed it. I slowly became a persona non grata. I took myself out of society. I went weeks without talking to anyone other than my son when he was with me. And I continued to wake up in the hospital from time to time, always having to ask when I woke up, don't mean to bother you, could you let me know why I'm here? And always being told the same thing, that I wasn't making sense, that I was out of touch with reality. Someone had called the police or the sheriff, and they had brought me there. Other than my first episode in Philadelphia, I have no memory of any of my other psychotic episodes. Some of them are funny, like the time Charlie Sheen and I were hanging out with Barack Obama, talking about the downsides of intergalactic space travel. Some of them will break your heart, like they do mine, and always will. Like the time my son had to find my phone, call his brother, who called his mom, who called the police, who came to the hotel where we were staying, and took him home, and took me away, because he was terrified, and I wasn't making sense, and he didn't know what else to do. He had just turned 8 years old, and we were on spring break. And that was his introduction to his father's mental illness. I had every reason to believe that things were going to continue like they'd been going. Except the last time I left the hospital, I left with new medication and something else. I left with a referral to Greater Cincinnati Behavioral. I came to GCB with no expectations and not much hope, but I had to try something new. I met Dr. Tracy Scale, who I immediately liked, and we started trying new meds. Dr. Scale has a philosophy that I bought into from the very beginning, that no one gives up, and that good enough is never good enough. There's always better. Dr. Scale means the world to me. I trust her, I respect her, and I owe her more than I can ever repay. although she would say that's not the case. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. When I came to GCB, I also met the person who's more responsible for me being here tonight than anyone. My care manager, Allison. The first time I met Allison was at my house. I took her outside, showed her my driveway, showed her my car, and I said, Allison, if you're ever here and my car is here, that means I'm here. You are welcome to stand on the porch and ring the doorbell as long as you want. I'll eventually answer. And she did. And she kept doing it. And she kept doing it. She got to know me, my background, and my life. And she started to build trust with me. When I was ready, we started making shopping lists, going to the store, buying food, so that I could plan menus for the week. When we went through my mail, it wasn't unusual for me to go weeks and not even go to the mailbox. Every week, for months and months, she came over and we talked and did little tasks that moved me further along the spectrum of self-sufficiency. One morning, a couple of years ago, Allison called, it was about 6:30 in the morning, and asked if I wanted to go walking at Eden Park. Sure, of course I did. So we walked and we talked. For months, in addition to coming to my house every week, Allison called every once in a while, early in the morning, and we went walking. I think of myself as a pretty smart guy, but it took me several months to realize Allison wasn't looking for a walking buddy. She was making sure that I was showered, dressed, medicated, and out of the house, that I wasn't isolating. Allison saw what could be when I couldn't. And she did, and still does, everything that she can to empower me. It's not uncommon for Allison and I to see each other several times a week, and rarely do 2 days go by that we don't text or talk. For as wonderful and as smart as she is, she still hasn't gotten to the point that she can say that we're friends. But I say it enough for both of us. I'm not exaggerating here, and I've told this to Allison many times. I would not be here tonight were it not for Allison. She's talked me off of more ledges than I can count. And she's always done the next right thing for me, whether I wanted it or not. There aren't words enough to tell you what Allison means to me for my life. I have never considered that I wouldn't work again. I knew that if I gave up on that goal, that I would be quitting. And if I quit, I wouldn't be around much longer. I want to work. I've always wanted to work. And I've always been good at what I do. When Allison and I put together my goals every 3 months, work was always on the list. In April of last year, she told me about the supported employment program at GCB. And she said that there was an opening in the commissary. I had no idea what a commissary was, but I knew that I wanted that job. You've heard anecdotes like this many times, but that doesn't make them any less true. The day I went for the interview was one of the worst I've ever had. I remember thinking how much I didn't want to go talk to anyone, but I knew that if I didn't do something different, no matter how much it hurt to make it happen, things were not going to end well for me, and that the emotional collateral damage that would do to the people who love me was something I couldn't think about. So in May, I started working in the snack bar and the commissary at the wellness center at GCB. I had no idea what a 20-hour-a-week minimum wage job would mean to me. I also had no idea what minimum wage was. I was pretty happy to find out it's more than $8 an hour now. There were so many good things about going back to work, from just getting out of the house to learning how to stick to a schedule, to feeling like there was someplace I belonged, someone that trusted me with responsibility. I was caught off guard when I left work the Friday of my first week. Dr. Scale loves this story. I was leaving the snack bar, and 4 or 5 of the people that I work with said, "Have a great weekend. See you Monday." Have a great weekend. See you Monday. I barely made it to the parking lot before tears were streaming down my face. I had forgotten how much it means as a human to have social interaction and how good it feels when we do. Things went well in the commissary, and I started to feel for the first time in 10 years that I actually had something to offer, that I could make something out of my life that my family would be proud of, that I could be proud of. As I've said, my skills were in relationship management, so in the fall, I started putting them to use again. I asked Dave Meek, who you saw in the video, if he would mentor me on the nonprofit world, and we met once a week for months until I was familiar with this sector. Incidentally, Dave has one of my favorite quotes over the last 11 years. We were in his office one afternoon talking. Somehow, dating came up. Dave asked me why I hadn't dated in 10 years. I said, "Dave, the first thing people ask when they meet you is, what do you do?" "Well, I stay awake for days at a time. Sometimes I talk to people who aren't there. And I've got a care manager who calls me and reminds me to shower." Dave sat back in his chair and made a tent with his fingers, and he looked really serious, and he said, "I wouldn't lead with that." Eventually, in December, I sat down with Jeff O'Neill, GCB's CEO. I told him that I didn't set out to meet with him, but I just kept getting kicked up to him by everyone I spoke to. Subjectively, it felt very appropriate. I'd spent my career in CEOs' offices. I'd gone to Indiana University's Kelley School of Business in Bloomington to get my MBA, a top 10 business school. I felt like I had a lot to offer, and I belonged in the room. Objectively, it played a little bit differently. A busy CEO taking almost 2 hours out of his schedule to meet with literally the last employee on his organizational chart. But that's indicative of the commitment that I've found everywhere at GCB. In January of this year, a job posting came up, and several people approached me and told me about it, said that I should apply. The Recovery Center of Hamilton County was looking for a program manager, someone to oversee their curriculum and to help develop and implement strategic initiatives. When I interviewed for the job, the first thing that Chris Pedotto, the executive director, said to me was, "You've got friends in high places." I still don't know how many conversations he had about me, but I do know that I've had people from almost every department in GCB come to me and say that they reached out to him on my behalf. I told Chris after our interview that it felt so wonderful to be able to sit opposite him at his desk and to feel for the first time in 10 years like I belonged there, and that GCB was directly responsible. And then I went to my car and I called Allison. I'd like to share part of an email that I sent to Dr. Scale after I accepted the position at the Recovery Center. Quote, "I'm an empiricist, a pragmatist. I've never considered myself a higher purpose person, but I am today. When I tell people this, I ask the simple question, how can I not be? every contact with GCB, every office visit, every counseling visit, every talk, every encouraging word from you and the GCB staff literally carried my hope for me when I could no longer carry it for myself. So yes, I believe in a higher purpose now. And I believe in you, in GCB, in your employees, and in every stakeholder and every donor whose contributions have made my life possible. And I've actually gone online and looked at all the quarterly newsletters and read each of their names because of what they've done for me and my family. Because of all of you, I now have the audacity not only to hope, but to expect success. And that is a gift beyond any other. Thank you is not a big enough expression, but I hope it's a start. End quote. Thank you all very much for your time, for your dedication, and for your commitment to changing lives for the better. If you ever wonder if you're making a difference, please think about this. My story is one of 30,000. 30,000 mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters whose lives are touched every year by GCB. So yes, you are making a difference. And for me and my family, that difference means everything. Thank you very much.